In 1977, the average American long-haul trucker drove half the miles a modern driver covers and earned a wage that, in today's dollars, sat near six figures. By 2024, that same job paid a median of $57,440. Same trucks, same highways, same freight. University of Pennsylvania sociologist Steve Viscelli put it bluntly. Today's long-haul drivers produce twice the output for 40% less pay. This was not a slow drift of the labor market. It was legislated. On one specific day in one specific year. That day was July 1st, 1980. President Jimmy Carter signed Public Law 96-296, the Motor Carrier Act. He called it historic. He promised it would save American consumers $8 billion a year. Senator Ted Kennedy, the bill's most powerful champion, framed it as a war on inflation and corporate cartels. For 45 years, since the original Motor Carrier Act of 1935, the Interstate Commerce Commission had set trucking rates, controlled which routes a carrier could run, and decided who got into the business at all. The 1980 law tore that structure down. The intended target was the Interstate Commerce Commission. The actual target, the only place those promised consumer savings could come from, was the paycheck of the driver. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what existed first. In 1980, roughly 57% of American truckers were union members. The Teamsters National Master Freight Agreement set wage floors that made driving one of the best-paid blue-collar jobs in the country. A long-haul trucker could own a house, raise a family, take a paid vacation, and retire on a pension. Then the floor opened. Within 10 years of the Motor Carrier Act, the number of licensed motor carriers in the United States doubled, exceeding 40,000. Truckload shipping rates, adjusted for inflation, fell 25% between 1977 and 1982. New non-union carriers, Schneider National, J.B. Hunt, Werner Enterprises, Swift Transportation, exploded across the freight map. J.B. Hunt, which ran 1,000 trucks in 1980, would post $12.09 billion in revenue by 2024. The cheaper rates Carter promised did materialize. Economist Michael Belzer, who studied the industry for decades, identified where the savings actually came from. Not efficiency, not technology, labor. By 1995, Belzer documented that real driver wages had fallen roughly 30%. Viscelli pushed the analysis further. Total employee compensation per mile in over-the-road trucking, he found, fell 44% between 1977 and 1987. A single decade of deregulation cut driver pay nearly in half, and that cut held. The mechanism was the pay structure itself. Under regulation, drivers were paid by the mile, but the per-mile rate was anchored to fixed freight prices. When rates were deregulated and competition compressed them, the per-mile rate stayed. Everything that wasn't driving, pre-trip inspections, fueling, loading, unloading, waiting at the dock, became unpaid time. The American Transportation Research Institute calculates that in 2023, the average driver was detained at a customer's dock for between 117 and 209 hours. The industry lost 135.9 million productive hours, $11.5 billion in lost productivity, and $3.6 billion in direct expenses. The average driver personally lost between $11,000 and $19,000 to detention alone. Then came the new narrative. Beginning in 2018, the American Trucking Associations declared a national driver shortage, 80,000 short, climbing toward a projected 160,000. But the data refused to cooperate. The Bureau of Labor Statistics counted over 2 million heavy truck drivers. Driving schools issued more than 400,000 new commercial driver's licenses every year. Annual turnover at the largest truckload carriers had hovered above 90% for decades. There were not too few drivers. There were too few drivers who would stay. The clearest evidence arrived on July 30th, 2023. Yellow Corporation, a 99-year-old unionized freight carrier, ceased operations. 6 days later, it filed. Chapter 11, the largest trucking bankruptcy in American history. 30,000 jobs gone. 22,000 of them Teamsters. The economy absorbed an estimated $5 billion hole. The federal government, which had handed Yellow a $700 million COVID loan in 2020, over the objection of the Defense Department, recovered only a fraction. The unionized model that had survived since 1924 simply could no longer compete against the deregulated landscape its own industry had helped create. 17 months later, on January 16, 2025, a federal task force chartered by the Department of Transportation delivered its final report on the lease purchase programs run by the modern mega carriers. The conclusion: fewer than 1 in 100 drivers who enter these agreements ever come to own the truck. The task force estimated 200,000 drivers were trapped in arrangements it described as designed to ensure failure. By October 2025, even ATA chief economist Bob Costello had begun walking back the shortage narrative, telling industry executives in San Diego that the problem was, quote, a quality problem around drivers, much more so than an absolute number. The cheapest freight rates in industrialized history did not come from clever logistics. They came from a pay structure that turned working hours into unpaid hours, a union that was allowed to bleed out, and a workforce that gets replaced every 12 months, whether the country notices or not. The Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers Act, reintroduced in March 2025, would for the first time since the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 grant interstate truckers the right to overtime pay. Its odds in the current Congress are roughly 1 in 100. If this kind of investigation is what you came for, subscribe to the Big Rig Files. There's a lot more under the hood.